start the Community Budget Advisory Committee meeting of Wednesday, October 7th. First order of business is called to order. Just did that. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded that the agenda be approved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Then we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion?
I didn't read 'em.
So moved.
Motion, and did I see a hand wave over here of a second?
Yeah, sure.
I did. Been moved and seconded that the minutes be approved. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, the motion carries. We'll go on then to item number 4, organizational business, and 4.1. Kari.
Good evening, co-chairs, committee members. This evening I have a memo in your packet with the information and updates, but then I also have some new information that was not in the packet that I have presented here. And wanted to share with the committee that now all of the preliminary tax numbers are in, since they were due to the county at the end of September. Just wanted to show you what this looks like. And in this example, this is for a median value home in Bloomington, which is valued at $286,400 for the 2021 property taxes. And the preliminary tax levy for the city of Bloomington was 5%. Again, that's the maximum it can be. It can't be any higher than that. And then we do know now that the Hennepin County preliminary tax was set at 0%, and school district preliminary tax levy was set at 2.8%. So what this is showing is if Hennepin County stays at 0%, doesn't go any lower, and if school district stays at 2.8, and then the other taxing jurisdictions, we just have those grouped together. So if we just keep those at their preliminary tax levies, this is how it would look for a 5% tax levy for the city of Bloomington, a 3% tax levy, or 0%, so no increase. So you can see just that the only line that's changing here is how the city of Bloomington annual tax impact changes. So for 5%, it would be $41 more for the year for the city of Bloomington. And 3% would be $18 for the year. And a 0% increase, so no increase, would actually be a deduction or a decrease of $16. And so you can see how that totals. So in all these scenarios that we have in total for the median value home, it is a reduction to the annual taxes. So if there are any questions on this for the committee or anything that was in the memo, we'd be happy to answer those.
Any questions? Not seeing any questions. Josh, I'm assuming you'll raise your hand if you've got a question or a comment that you want to make.
Yep, I'll raise my hand. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. We hear you really well. Okay. So if there's no questions on that, that'll be the discussion on 4.1. Then we will move on to 4.2. And if you could make me be the presenter for just a second here, I have a couple slides that I want to show. Thank you. So just to kind of recap where we're at in the process here, these are the remaining activities that the committee has. So tonight we're completing the 3 preliminary budget scenarios to get wider public feedback. Next Monday, the co-chairs will be at the city council meeting talking about the preliminary proposals that we have and talking to the council, briefing them on that and getting preliminary feedback from them. Next week, we also have a couple different opportunities for the public to give reaction to us. Those are available on our website at blm.mn/cbac. You can see where those sessions are and how to sign up for those. We do not meet next week as a group, but then we have 2 remaining meetings that are on the calendar, which are on October 21st and October 28th. those are the meetings we'll be taking the feedback from the community and editing the list that we have, and creating the final set of budget scenarios to send to the city council. Those will go to the city council on either the 9th or the 16th. I don't remember that I've heard really which of those two meetings the council was going to be scheduled for. I don't know, Jamie, do you remember which of those meetings we
Sure,
took?
co-chairs, committee members, the council has a study session on November 9th, and I believe that's when we would first present
Okay.
it, so that we have several opportunities to meet with.
Hope I seen.
It is November 9th. I think it's a regular.
Is it a regular meeting?
Meeting.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I wasn't sure because I looked at those and it wasn't clear to me. I couldn't remember what we had decided on that. And then just for the information of the committee, we do not have any meetings scheduled in November or December, but it's possible that based on the city council's conversations, they may want us to react to some questions that they have. And so it's very possible that we'll have a meeting or two in that period providing feedback or reactions to ideas that the city council has. So that's really where we're at right now. So we're, really kind of tonight wrapping up these preliminary budget scenarios. So this picture talks a little bit about just at a bigger picture where we're at in kind of adopting kind of budget reductions and kind of changes to budget scenarios. And I wanted to frame this up because there's a couple things that we've already put on our list and said that we're going to do. There's the Valley View Pool Plan savings, and there is the Normandale Lake abatement. Both of those have been kind of adopted in, and those are baked in the budget that we got from the staff. So those are kind of already baked in. So we don't need to account for those in the numbers that are on the right up there. And so tonight, really what we're doing is we're going to complete our work on the preliminary budget scenarios. And just to kind of recap, we have three scenarios that we're aiming for. There's a scenario that the one that's the first listed there, which has a 5% property tax levy increase that requires additional budget reductions beyond what you see on the left there of a little bit under $1.6 million. The second scenario that we agreed to create was a 3% levy increase. That one has a total amount of budget reductions of a little bit under $2.9 million. Okay, so just to be clear, that $2.9 million is inclusive of the $1.5 million, so it's not additive on top of that. It's inclusive of that. And then finally, the third scenario that we've agreed that we're going to create is a 0% property tax levy increase. And that one requires a total set of budget reductions of $4.8 million. So really, those are the those are the three kind of preliminary scenarios that we're going to create. We've already done quite a bit of work. So we have a spreadsheet that shows kind of preliminary ranking. We've had quite a bit of discussion about things. The other thing I wanted to talk about is we do have a parking lot for ideas that we talked about, but are not being considered for the 2021 budget. And the primary reason that they're not being considered for the 2021 budget is because they, for some reason, couldn't be depended on as part of making our decision for the 2021 budget. They might require legislation to occur. They might require a deal to be struck with someone else. Or they might require something that requires more lead time than we had in order to get something to certainty. So these are ideas that I think the committee was curious about. These are not ideas that the committee voted and said if we could do it, we're going to go do these things, but they were things that the committee was curious about. And one of the things that if we add more things to this we'll transmit this list to the council as part of our final deliverable at the beginning of November, with a list of things that we considered and for various reasons couldn't be done right now, but that the council could choose on a kind of longer time frame to kind of take up. So if you do notice that there are things that we've talked about that aren't on this list, because I think this is the kind of exhaustive list of those things right now, please let me know and I'll make another slide in here or I'll take notes on that so that we make sure that we have that list. With that, any questions on that at this point? So that's it for me. Jamie, I think you had a slide that you wanted to show and talk about. Is that right?
You do, Mr. Chairs and committee members. The committee and the co-chairs had asked for some additional input from staff on the different bundles of reductions that had been put together, and wanted some input from our executive leadership team on those options. So our team worked through those, and on the staff on the screen, what you see are the requests that our team would make to the committee for modifying the bundle somewhat. So what we did is looked at each of the options submitted by the departments, and the committee, all in all, I think lined up pretty well with where the departments were in terms of prioritizing and understanding impact to community, and then putting those in the appropriate order. What we have here reflects some of the prioritization that each of the departments would do. And so the way to read this chart is for each of these options, where you see the plus would be moving that item into that specific category, and the minus would be moving out of it. So, for example, that first line, staffing changes to our public health, family health unit, would move that out of the 0% scenario, which is the lowest of the three, right? If we have to get down to the lowest, this would be among the last reductions we would make, and actually move it into the 5%. So among the first reductions we would make, and that's a reflection of the work that the staff has been doing to make sure that their operation is getting right-sized for the next couple of years, and that they've got the appropriate staff and the appropriate services. So you can see there they have two different public health items that they are very comfortable moving into that first tier of reductions and out of the last tier of reductions. And so what we tried to do here was to swap them out so that the financial impact is basically offset so that the numbers stay about the same. Okay. So as we walk through these, you'll see some places like the traffic calming and the underfill, the traffic engineer, moving that out of the higher area and then into the lower amount of reductions. The traffic calming is actually has a pretty high impact to residential neighborhoods especially, and so our ability to get out there and do speed reduction strategies in neighborhoods at the request of residents is one of the more frequently requested services that we have in Public Works. So willing to make some swaps and some trades there to try and preserve that as possible. So in the end, what you see is we have moved a few things around and wanted to present these back to the committee and have a little bit of discussion, and co-chairs would certainly take direction from you on how you'd like to facilitate that conversation. But what we have here reflects the feedback from our executive team, and like I say, I think this is a relatively short list, and I'd say it was a good job to the committee that I think the committee lined up pretty well with where the staff was in terms of understanding priorities and impacts to the community.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. So the question that we're going to need to answer here, if we decide that we're going to adopt any of these suggestions from the staff, is we're going to have to make a more concrete decision about where we insert each of these things in the priority list, because that necessarily will cause some things to be pushed down and some things to move up. And so with that, I think I'd asked, do we have a printout of this available to us?
Yes. We do not right now, but
Okay.
we can get you one.
Okay, that'd be great, because it would be a little bit helpful to do that. Because what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to refer to this and then be able to see the kind of talk about where the right place to put these changes in. But we can start out by just getting folks' reaction to any of the proposals that the staff leadership has brought forward, or if you have questions about them. Breen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it will be helpful to have a printout. So when I am looking at so you've got options 75 and 76 put together. When I look at 75 and 76, those are actually two positions, correct? Or it's the program and a position? One's for 77.5 and the other's for 24,000? Does that come out to be?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
But
And I should also,
it's the program and it's a position?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I should add, not wanting to cut you off, Maureen, but all of our directors are available on the call tonight too. So they're there if you have specific questions about why they felt it was more appropriate to have these in different categories too.
And just so on the question of 75 and 76, if you in the handout with the ranking spreadsheet that we were going to work from for tonight, which is if you look at page, I don't know, it's the second to last sheet of paper in the handout that has the ranked list in it. You'll notice that 75 and 76 got moved up and put together in the spreadsheet. And the reason for that is the staff realized after the things were presented that those things really need to be treated as a unit. So that's, Maureen, that's why those two show up as a combined item on there, is the staff realized after we went through the ranking that those really could not be treated separately and needed to be a single thing.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions about this? Go ahead, John Gibbs.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I can follow that. I can see there's a lot of good rationale to all that. I'm just thinking as we move that into the instrument that we're using, would we envision, so a number of these things move from 3 to 5 or from, whatever, 0 to 5. Where would you imagine these would end up in the rankings? Would these essentially be the lowest number would be a way to look at it?
Here's what I'm proposing that we would go do, and this is the reason why I asked for the printout, because I think what we're going to want to do is switch away from this view,
Okay.
and we're going to switch to this spreadsheet.
Yep.
And then my thinking is that we'll walk through this list, and we'll have a short conversation about each one and say, it makes sense to insert this at this rank, and go about it that way. So that was my thinking on how to go about dealing with that. I'm open to other ideas, but that was my thought on how to handle that. Other questions or comments?
Co-chairs, since we have two of our members are participating virtually, we'll go ahead and email this to them right now. So for Josh and Jessica, we'll get this in an email so you can at least pop it up on your screen from where you're at.
Okay. So I have you know how long it's going to be until we get printouts, or do I need to go on and kind of take a next thing? So, I see printing coming in the door as we speak.
Here they are.
Your ears should have been burning Gloria's. Okay, Jamie, was there anything else you wanted to show up there before we switch away?
No.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. Chris, can I have control back, please? Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're switching to this view. So this view is a little bit different than the view that we used last week. The items are in the order that we ended up in last week, but it's a simpler looking spreadsheet so that I can zoom in here a little bit and get a little bit more showing up on the screen. First, I do want to go through and point out a couple changes that I made to the order of things since the spreadsheet that ended last week. And it's all things that were either kind of staff feedback to say these things go together, or they are reflecting items that we already discussed. So the first one I want to discuss, and the items that are marked as ranked number 1 there, is we agreed that we were going to move all of the travel-related things up at the top of the list because the likelihood that those would get spent wasn't super high, and so it just made sense right off the top to do that. So unless there's an objection to that, I'm gonna leave that as it is. The next item is related to Public Works, and basically what this does is this brings these 3 items, 79, 80, and 81, these 3 items together. And this was another example of feedback where the Public Works Department said that these ought to be combined together into one set of items. So this is a little bit bigger change. So at this point, I'll give people just a second to look at that and either say, I'm fine with that, or by doing that, I want to change the kind of relative priority of these items. So it's the three selected things in Public Works, 79, 80, and 81.
So these three go together.
Akia, you'll need to use your microphone.
These three items go together, the park staff said.
That's right. So the staff intent here was that these three items should be effectively treated as a unit when we're making a decision and be considered together. And if you're wondering why, we can certainly ask.
Yeah,
So,
can we ask why?
yeah. Carl, are you around that you can answer that question?
Good evening, all.
Hi, Carl.
So we had actually, in retrospect, we should have submitted this as one item. At the very beginning, when we were putting items together, we were trying to kind of identify discreetly what the service impacts of each of these would be, and that's why we submitted them as three separate ones. But really, in the way we looked at this is that by eliminating a park position, we have a number of park employees in that same position. They don't all do one activity. They kind of do work across a whole spectrum of activities. So we sat down and talked about, if we lost that position, what other things would we have to change in our work to make this all work as a package? So what this one does is it gets rid of one park maintenance position, but to accommodate that, we're also reducing the amount of ash trees that we contract out on boulevards, and we would do that work with our staff. So there's a savings there. And then also we would have some changes to the amount of trails we plow in the winter. And this is probably, from a service point of view, this is probably the most notable item. What we're proposing is that in the winter we would not plow basically our neighborhood sidewalks. These are generally those trails in our system that are least used. And oftentimes it takes us many days before we even get to them. So sometimes if we have multiple snowstorms, we won't actually clear those trails for as long as a week or so. Would note that we would still clear all the main trails on all the main arterials, all the ones around schools, and all the ones in our kind of commercial areas. And there is in your packet a map that shows which trails would be eliminated.
Okay, did that answer your question?
It did, but just a quick
Yeah, go ahead.
follow-up. Are there any, I know these wouldn't be main trails that we wouldn't be plowing this winter, but are there any city ordinances about the plowing schedule then that we did?
So technically, our city ordinance requires sidewalks and trails adjacent to private property to be cleared by the private property owner. For many years, the city has cleared these trails and has not enforced that item. If we were to eliminate this piece, we would have to make a decision whether we just continue to not enforce that, or if we actually tried to enforce that. I expect we would make a modification to our ordinance to not enforce that, to not make that a responsibility of adjoining properties. But that is that'll be a little item that we'll have to resolve if this goes forward.
Okay, Neil.
And just as a matter of clarification, if the agreement was made to levy at 5%, then these things would stay in. They would still have those options in the budget. If
So right now, anything that's listed here in this 5% bucket is eliminated at the 5% levy level. So this would all go into effect at the 5% levy.
At a 5%, no, you're moving it over to 3%.
Well, right as it's shown, they have proposed that we move it over. We haven't.
Oh, okay.
We haven't decided that it's going to be moved over. So right now,
We aren't smarter than the staff, Mr. Chairman.
well, so we're going to go and have a conversation about that. So we'll talk about each of these things as we go through and decide what we're going to do with them. But as it is right now, this is in the committee's agreed upon list. It's in the 5% bucket.
But with Carl's explanation
Yeah.
of grouping them as the staff had recommended, if we do the 5% levy increase, then those services will continue to be given to the city of Bloomington residents.
If we,
If we levy 5%.
if we decide to move it into the 3% bucket, then that's true, yeah. If
Well,
we
that's what
leave it,
I'm-
we leave it where
Give
it's,
me the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
That's what I'm assuming. I'm trying to explain it. If we adopt that that's the biggest item on this page that the staff gave us.
Mm-hmm.
If we agree to levy at 5%, then those services would continue to go to the residents of Bloomington.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think when we explain these, we need to explain it that way because it's confusing for me. I'm getting old and senile, so I understand that's a problem. But on the same token, as we articulate these things, as was mentioned earlier in that letter from John and Maureen, we need to flag these things up so there's no misunderstanding. If we do the 5%, we will continue to have those services. Okay?
okay. So then, I think, does that answer any questions that people had for Carl about that item? Okay, so then I'm going to ask the question now, since we're talking about these particular items, and it's on the list to potentially be moved into the 3% levy bucket, is how do people feel about moving it from the 5% to the 3% levy? What's the sense of the committee around that? People generally in agreement with that?
Yes?
Okay, seeing nods on that. So here's the question that we need to answer then, is we need to go look at this 3% area here, and we need to make a decision about what rank we would put it in here. In other words, where are we moving it to? And the form of that is you're going to say, I think it should go after 300 and like either after number 55. You know, that's probably the best way to do it, is to say, I think it should go after like number 55. So I'm interested in someone making a proposal on where in here they would insert that. If you put it close to the bottom, it's possible that it might get shoved down tonight, kind of out of the way. So that's what I'm looking for at this point. And the reason that we're going to try to be precise about this is folks are going to come along with more proposals for changes after we do this, and where these get inserted in here may cause it to float into a different bucket.
Mr. Chairman, I think we had asked the staff to go back and consolidate these and look at them and put them together and group them and give us the benefit of how they look at them. I just think we should take all of these things and incorporate them into the 3% or the 0% and put them at the top of the list of that category and just get it done rather than trying to do them one at a time,
Well,
piecemeal.
I'm certainly
Otherwise,
willing. I'm certainly willing to do that if everyone agrees that at this point that anything that was put in the 3% bucket by the staff is more important than every other 3% thing. Okay, but just realize that as we have a further conversation about things, that things will float around and that will end up moving. So that there's no way to make that sticky through the remaining part of the conversation for tonight. So if folks want to do it in a bulk way like that and do it and just say that these are more important than every other thing in that category, we can certainly do that. But at least based on the conversations we've had as a committee so far, I'm not sure that people agree with that. So thoughts on that? John?
Mr. Chair, I don't disagree with that. My thinking just to move this along might be that we move any that change to the very next in line, reflective of the direction that they changed. In other words, if they went from a 0 to a 3, then they'd be at the bottom of the 3. If they went from a 5 to a 3, they'd be at the top of the 3.
Okay.
Because it gets it as close
That's
to
a
where
more nuance
it's
around
natural.
that then. Yeah. Okay. What do people think about that?
Would agree with that.
Okay. Okay. Let me go and reflect that here. It'll take a minute to do that. So,
Thanks, John.
okay. So 42.
Mr. Chair, while you're figuring that out, can I ask the city manager a question?
Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jamie, can you refresh my memory, who is on this, your executive team? Who are
I
those?
need to.
Sure. Co-chairs, committee members, Maureen. The executive leadership team is each of the department directors, as well as the assistant city manager and our racial equity coordinator.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question too, please?
Sure, go ahead.
Chair? For the city manager, could you re-explain what the city staff did here? Sorry, on the previous document.
Sure. Co-chairs, committee members, Akuya. We went through the grouping that the committee had performed at the last meeting and looked at those priorities and the scoring on those and compared them to what the departments had submitted. So when the departments went through this exercise, I asked them to also prioritize them. And we made a decision when we brought those to the committee not to present the priorities to the committee members because we really wanted to give you the opportunity to do that from your own perspective, recognizing that the perspective of a citizen, of a resident of the community may be different than the perspective of the city staff, right? So we didn't want to influence that. And that's why I say I think it's actually quite remarkable that the way that it played out, there was a lot of concurrence between where the committee landed and where the staff had set the priorities. So all we did was we went through and looked at the ones where we felt the prioritization within the department warranted a little bit of additional consideration for the committee.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions to cover for me editing the spreadsheet?
I'm on?
You are. Yes, you are.
Yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
Okay, thank you, Chair Peterson. And I have a question regarding number 280, the Parks and Recreation Cultural Arts grants. Are those given to the high schools, the community at all, or are all these grants given to the public, or they have to be how is distributed? I guess because I had a questions from the BIPOC community on the Latino yesterday, and I wasn't sure if that was a fee that it was given to them as a reduction, how that will affect the especially the BIPOC communities is my question.
Mr. Co-Chairs, committee members, Jessica, the cultural arts grants are a way for the city to support the arts community, and especially the arts community utilizing the Bloomington Center for the Arts. Each year, there is an application process for organizations interested in receiving a grant to submit to the city. And we have a selection panel. It's our Center for the Arts manager, and then I believe usually 4 other people from the community. And they score those applications, and then distribute the grants after the council approves them. The recipients, there are usually around 7 or 8 recipients, and for the most part, they are partner organizations in the Center for the Arts. So Artistry, Angelica Cantanti, the Symphony Orchestra. Those are the recipients that we're talking about. So they aren't grants to organizations in the community per se. They're the performing arts groups in the city.
Thank you, Jamie. A follow-up question. So this will be on top of an association that gives some type of grants. So we give an extra help, or this is just the first kind of help that we get to those kids?
You know, each of the organizations have revenue streams that are specific to them. So they get their operating dollars from different places. Some get it from ticket revenue that they gain at their events here. Some get it from philanthropic sources or through state arts grants. So this is just another revenue opportunity for them that the council many years ago made a decision that it was appropriate for the city to provide grant funding for supporting the arts here. And so it's a competitive grant process.
Great. Thank you, Jamie.
Chair, I have another question.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Again, for the city manager, this is about number 22 or rank 380. It's the fire mechanic, I believe. One second. Oh, the fire fleet repair technician. And this is an election to eliminate the position. So is the chief on the line by chance?
The chief is on the line, Mr. Chair, committee members, Aquia. And like I say, our team just worked through this today. So we had a focused conversation on this specific item. So Chief Seal can answer that question better than I can.
Okay, and the question's about, 1, how many mechanics we have, and 2, what would the impact be of having fewer mechanics, and the cost benefit of having less mechanics in the maintenance schedule of the quite expensive vehicles that we have.
Yep. Chief Seal?
Sure. I can explain what we've done. This is a new position. This mechanics position is a new position. Currently, for most of our large fire apparatus repairs, we outsource that. And for some of our repairs, we use City Garage. So it would not currently have a real impact on our ability to fix vehicles. Our original intent was to hire a full-time mechanic to work on fire vehicles because we were going to realize a savings compared to our outsourcing contracts. One of the things that we did as part of this process of addressing reduced revenues to the city is we changed our deployment strategy for fire vehicles. So we are actually reducing the number of ladder trucks in the city by 2. We'll end up with 4 ladder trucks and 2 rescues in the city. The reduction of those 2 ladder trucks, in conjunction with some changes in how we were going to do our preventative maintenance in the city, we feel that we're going to be able to make the same savings that we would have made by hiring our own mechanic and not outsourcing our repairs at this time. So we feel that with the changes we've made in our fleet, with the changes we're going to make in our maintenance program, that we're going to realize the same savings that we were going to by hiring this mechanic, as well as not having to hire the mechanic.
Thank you, Chief Seal. May I ask a follow-up question?
Certainly.
You said the last 2 ladder trucks. Does that mean we were going to be purchasing ladder trucks and we're putting them on hold, or what does that mean? Sorry.
So what we did was, to give you a sense, ladder trucks are very expensive.
Yes.
They cost probably $1.5 million to $1.75 million, depending upon what kind of apparatus you actually buy. So currently, or actually not currently anymore, we've already started this reduction, but we used to have 6 ladder trucks in the city, and they were all part of our replacement schedule. And we had another one slated to be replaced next year for over $1.5 million. And with the realization that our revenues were dropping and the amount of money that we were going to have to put in to our fire equipment fund to make these acquisitions, we reevaluated our response model. And we did that not only internally, but we also asked the same company that did our fire service assessment and got an opinion rendered from them on our ability to still provide quality service with fewer ladder trucks. And they were right on board because we're not actually reducing the number of trucks, we're changing the kinds of trucks. So those 2 ladders that we're reducing are actually being replaced with rescues. And what those are is a big truck that carries people and all the same tools as a ladder truck, but it does not have the aerial device, which is a very expensive part of that truck. So we're not losing capability. We'll still have 4 aerial devices in the city, and the reduction of those 2 is going to have a very positive impact on our fire equipment replacement fund for several years immediately and then ongoing throughout the future.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying.
Yes, ma'am.
And it looks like Chair Peterson's still working.
I think I'm at the point where it is ready to talk about.
Okay, questions later. Thank you.
Okay, so let's see here. You don't want to do the exciting sharing of my editing of the spreadsheet for 5 minutes while we talk? Okay, so just to kind of recap where we're at, kind of in the neighborhood of the 5% levy here, we have these items here that kind of ended up moving down to moving into the 5% from the 3%. There is this one $10,000 item that doesn't quite fit, but that's within kind of the noise of what we're doing right now, so I didn't bother to try to rearrange things to fix that. Then the maintenance position moved into this position here. And then if we kind of scroll down to the bottom of these here, we may have to do a little bit of adjusting. Because 12 was going to end up in, no, I think we're in the right spot here. So you see a lot of these 551s end up right on the bubble. 551s end up in right at the bottom of the 3%. So these could actually go with 555 with the other ones. The issue we have is in terms of the granularity of the items at that point, it's hard to get them to land exactly right. So I think what we'll want to do is we'll want to kind of loop back at the end after we've made other adjustments to this and look at these to make sure that they ended up in the right spot that we're in, that they should be in. Because I didn't feel like it was my job to pick one thing to move out of the way in order to make room in the 3% bucket to do it. Okay, so these changes from the staff are now reflected in the spreadsheet. So at this point, we had talked during the last meeting about going through here and having people making proposals about changes that they wanted to make. Those could be in the forms of swapping items like the staff put together, or you could just propose that I want to move something from kind of rank number X to rank number Y, and let kind of the chips fall where they may on items below that. The way I'm going to go about doing this is we're going to do an around the room where each person has the opportunity to propose one thing so that we'll kind of allocate the time equally. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call off people's names. And if you have an item that you want to bring up as something that you want to adjust in the spreadsheet, it can be any of the items on here. It's not just the stuff that's showing on the screen. You've all got printed copies of the spreadsheets to work from. If you don't have something that you want to do, you can feel free to just say pass. And if you say pass, it's just like playing a card game. It'll eventually come back around to you again. So everybody clear on kind of how we're going to go about doing that? Alrighty, Akia is first.
Okay. I propose moving item or option number 85, the fertilizer on the ball fields, up to the 5% levy.
Okay. What rank is that on the spreadsheet
It's
there?
380, but I think we just changed it when we moved a couple, so it should be at the top.
Oh, it should be at the top. So
291,
this
I think
one
it
here.
was.
Okay. So
Nope. Sorry, it's still in the 3% right now.
yeah. So where would you like to put it? Between which two items?
Oh, that I hadn't considered.
Okay. Because that was the decision that I didn't feel like I just unilaterally make. I need you to make a proposal. So you could say, like, for option 85, I want to change its rank from 291 to 270. You could say that.
Yes. So let's see. Where's the? Yeah. So it can go to maybe to. How does it work? So 10. So 240 above the website upgrades.
So if you wanted it to be above the website upgrades, you could say 240 and put it there.
Yeah.
Okay. How do people on the committee feel about that proposal?
And I'm only saying that because if we're going to propose having fees for field usage, then maybe that could be considered part of the offset somehow with the fees that we'd be charging. It's 14.
Okay. Does anyone have a strong objection to that proposal? Not seeing a strong objection, so we're going to change that one to 240. Next up was Saw. Go ahead, Saw.
Yep. I would propose to move the dispatch supervisor, option number 10, that was at rank 410, down to the 0% levy, probably in the 660 range.
Okay, so we're talking about moving this here.
Yep.
Into roughly 660. So would you like it to be before 660 or after 660?
Before.
Before. Okay, so we'll say like 655. So the proposal is to move the dispatch supervisor currently at 410 to 655.
Then to make up for that shortfall in the 3% levy, I do have two options that I picked out to move up.
Okay.
So to make up for that, I would propose to move option number 50, which was at position 630, the artistry supplemental cultural support, and option 31, that was at about 670, the summer interns for EH and assessing, move those two up to the 3% area in about the 500 range, 490, 500.
So what's being proposed here is that number 50 and number 31 be moved to like 499, we'll say, or 495.
Yep.
And that the dispatch supervisor here at 410 be moved to, we'll just say they'll split the difference on those two things. We'll say it moves to kind of the 630 level. Thoughts on that?
So my reasoning behind that, dispatch supervisor, as we learned, they haven't had one for a couple years. And being in that kind of position with the stress and not having the support from someone to lead you or in a consistent way, I think would really affect the community, especially in the next coming year, if the pandemic does not stop. And so replacing it, although I don't want to necessarily affect the artistry support, I think that's a lower priority for me personally. And as we've seen the private sector, internships are being put on hold. As important as they are for bringing in new people, I think it would be wise to kind of follow suit and put that on hold for 21 and have our resources in the places that we will really need them for 21.
Okay. John, you had your hand up.
Mr. Chair, I guess my reaction is I wouldn't disagree with altering the dispatch supervisor, although I'd be inclined to kind of follow the chief's priorities there. But I think that trade, I don't see them particularly related. And I guess I'd like to make an argument for the $50,000 level at artistry. You recall, this is the replacement for what has been, over the last 5 years, a $200,000 level support. And the alternative would be 0 or 50. And it strikes me that in the era that we're at, there's a pretty big risk that the infrastructure crumbles if these groups that are challenged to have the earned income over the next year, but will have the expenses, don't. It strikes me we need to pay some attention to keeping them going, and I think that the startup costs, if you will, if essentially we got into a full mothball status, would be vastly more in years 2, 3, or 4 out. So I guess I would be concerned with that particular trade-off. I think that I like the positioning of the $50,000, which is, again, 25% of what it was last year, being in that zero area. So I'd prefer to look for some other trade-offs than that if it's important to preserve the dispatch position.
Other comments on that? John?
Mr. Chair, I could talk a little bit about the dispatch position. They do have a supervisor, but it's a sergeant that already has a full plate, and they are asked to keep an eye on dispatch. And that is not the best situation. They, on paper, have a dispatch personnel, but not somebody that is career-wise dedicated to that performance. So it's a trade-off to start with. So dispatch supervisor, which was going to be one of my suggestions anyway. Thank you very much. So it's not a clear one-for-one when you're looking at that.
Okay, other input on this one?
Can we also ask questions of the staff?
Sure, sure.
Okay. I do have a quick question then, Chair Peterson.
Go ahead.
For Chief Potts, I think. And we might come up with this later as we're talking about the police items. But there has been a trend upwards in petty crimes like bike thefts or maybe whatever. But my question is about has type 1 or part 1, so like serious crimes, has that increased in the community? This is the first question. 2, with the dispatch, is it possible as a solution, if it were to be cut in the future, that a volunteer program could be put into place? Like they have the volunteer sheriff type programs. Could you have a volunteer dispatcher who's, I don't know, obviously qualified, but not paid at the full rate of a dispatcher? Supervisor. Multiple questions. Sorry about that, Chief Potts.
Mr. Chair, community members, I think there's 2 questions there at least, and if I miss one, please let's circle back. But the part 1 crime question, it has overall part 1 crime, and just to be clear, it includes homicide, rape or criminal sexual conduct cases, burglary, aggravated assault, those crimes that you would consider to be serious or violent crime. It also includes theft. And that's just the way they calculate part 1 crime. So nearly all categories, with the exception of theft, are up and somewhat substantially this year. Theft is down partly because there's been a limited number of stores for many months that were open at the Mall of America and other retail areas in town. So part 1 crime is up in many categories, with the exception of theft. As far as a volunteer in the dispatch center, so supervising or just the function of being a police dispatcher, fire dispatcher, it is a job that requires about 16 weeks of training to become proficient in the use of the technology in the dispatch center. And we have not used volunteers in there, mostly because the training curve and training requirement to become proficient is so steep that we don't feel like we could effectively get a volunteer trained up to, and when I say 16 weeks, that's 40 hours a week for 16 weeks. And so the system is the technology in there is complicated. The records management CAD system that they're using is requires a lot of time and expertise and ongoing use to stay proficient. And so that is not an area where we've been able to utilize volunteers. We have started a volunteer program in some other areas, but for the reasons stated, dispatch is not one of those.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So while people are thinking about this, there's one thing that I forgot to show here, but this is a picture that kind of shows how the costs are falling on different departments at the different levels. So the way that you can read this particular sheet is that in the admin department, all of the burden of the cuts is falling on them in the 5% levy scenario, okay? Here you can see for community development, they've got about a little bit under $150,000 at the 5% levy, an additional $300,000 at the 3% levy, and then another $100,000 in the 0% scenario that we have. I thought that one thing that I thought was interesting about this was that I think reflects the values of the committee, and it should be an obvious thing based on the conversations that we had. But in the high levy scenarios, we hold the public safety agencies pretty harmless in the high revenue scenarios. But in the low revenue scenarios, the burden starts falling kind of more heavily on those particular groups, as we would expect, because we're prioritizing kind of holding them harmless if we have revenue to be able to do so. So in the current picture right here, just to kind of give you an idea, this just gives you an idea of how things end up falling in that. And this, if anybody wants to see this as we're going along, this updates automatically off of as we make changes to the other sheet. So as I'm resorting at this, we can come back and look at this at any point that we want to.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
I like this. I mean, I think this makes a lot of sense to me. And in fact, I was looking at, we're going to get a sheet passed out later about how to present it to the community.
Yeah.
And this would be a tremendous way, I think, to offer it to the community.
Yeah, I agree.
I know the devil's in the details, but this speaks volumes, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if we could add, Mr. Chair, a column of what the total, right? Is this the total? No, this is 5% levy, but the total amount that was proposed for the cuts. So.
Yeah, so in order to make the conversation be simpler here, there would be another column that would normally show up here, but I hid that in order to, because this, I just wanted to be able to show the impact of the things that we actually selected. But we could certainly, if that made sense in the presentation, include information like that. For a lot of people, even a chart like this is kind of an eye glazer a little bit, so we need to get some smart people who are good at graphics to kind of boil this down a little bit more. But I think that I was curious about how this laid out, and I thought it would be useful to kind of look at here.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
If we could just go back to and by the way, I agree with all that. I said I'd be interested in the chief's response and the dispatch, and I'm convinced by it. It makes sense to me, and Shaw's suggestion. But I wonder if we could go back then to the discussion about where we find that money.
Exactly right. Yep.
And I'm just, perhaps I'd be interested in the staff's reaction to this, but it strikes me that maybe worthy of thinking about number 70, which is also $50,000, but this is the contractual services related to reviewing the CIP and planning. And I'm just wondering if that might be a less impactful to the public and sort of mission way to find that 50,000.
So I think in order to kind of move on here, I think the first question I'm going to ask is how are people feeling about changing the dispatch supervisor, which is currently at 410 here, so it's in the 3% bucket, and we would be moving it down to 630, which is down here, kind of in the middle of the 0% bucket. If interested, maybe just people's thoughts on that question first, rather than, because I think tying them together makes it, there's a lot of dimensions to it, makes it complicated. So So let's just hear folks' thoughts on that particular question.
If we're going chair by consensus, then it's whatever the consensus is. But personally, I think it's fine where it is, especially if they've been operating to date with a deficit in staff. Then continuing that petite deficit might be a way to continue managing.
Okay. That end of the table, has anyone got an opinion over there that they want to voice? I'm not hearing enough from people to say that there's a consensus to make this change. So unless we get more people speaking up in favor of it, I'm going to say that there's not a consensus around this particular change.
I've
Okay.
got to ask a.
Yeah, go ahead, Maureen.
I thought I was smart, but I feel really dumb right now.
Wednesday night.
I'm still trying to figure out the whole process here.
Yeah.
As to, who's, we're up here, we're going to move it here, then this one's going to go here, and then this one's going to drop down. Frankly, I'm not tracking.
Okay.
There's just too many horse trading. I find this exercise daunting and lengthy that we're going to be here till 1 a.m. if we continue to do this. And I would like to see a better way. I don't know if I'm being totally off base, and I would like to hear from my colleagues here, but if we're going to do this, we're going to be here for quite some time. And I don't even know where I want to kind of shift by the time we get to me. Where's, what's John going to do? And then I might want to go, I don't know. I'm just not comfortable with what we're doing in the exercise. I'm sorry.
Game.
So I'm open to suggestions on kind of how to go about this differently. I think in the end, we're expected to create a set of 3 proposals. We have 3 proposals right now. So one thing we could do is we could say we're just going to go with this, and we're going to go out to the public with this tonight. We had at previous meetings we had a conversation about wanting to be able to reflect on this and make adjustments to it, and so I think that's what I'm trying to facilitate tonight is reflecting on that and making adjustments, and that necessarily means making a decision about if you're going to move something, where is it going to go. That's the process that I'm really trying to facilitate, and if there's a way to do it more smoothly, I'm open to ideas. Go ahead, Maureen. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, and I really appreciate your thought process through that. I'm just trying to figure out, from my perspective, where am I going to want to end up? And I'm kind of at the point where I'm going to probably take a pass tonight on things because
It's getting ugly. Really?
I want to hear from there's a lot here.
Yep.
And I just don't know how much more we can make these decisions without public input on what their thoughts are. And I'm a little concerned, too, that if they start looking at every little line item, do we want the public to get into the decision-making to eliminate, each of these individual items? I'm just not comfortable that is an option for the public. I'd like to hear more big buckets of reductions, and that would include elimination of this position and travel and all that. But I think we've done a lot of work here, and I just don't know how much more we can go, because with the recommendations and the changes, that could all change once the public has input. So the work we're doing tonight, I don't know. So I'm going to, for right now, my big thing is public safety. I want to preserve every dollar in public safety under cops and fire. Those would be my 2 top priorities, and my 3rd priority is the community development director. But I have an idea that I think that could, potentially go into a different bucket. But I'm just going to kind of stop there, because that's where all my horse trading would be in the, the police budget and some of the fire. So,
Well, it's certainly within the discretion of each person to say, I'm fine with kind of how this is laying out, and this is the one that we ought to go out to the public with. It's our process as a group, so there's really nothing that says that we have to change things tonight if we choose not to. And that's something that the group has to decide.
and Mr. Chair, I'm wide open to hear from my other commissioners as to what their recommendations. I'm not going to weigh in probably heavily over one over the other, because I just want, we're going to be making major decisions in 3 to 4 weeks. So I'm kind of waiting to hold to that point and see where we're at.
Okay. So I'm going to take that in the context of the question, which is, are we going to make that move that you're not in favor of adjusting that at this point, that you want to go with it as it is. Unless anybody has anything further that they want to bring up here, I'm going to say that there's not consensus around that particular change.
Mr. Co-Chair?
Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I second what Maureen was saying. I feel a little bit challenged to give up something to put it in a different bucket. Yesterday, I had a conversation with the Latino leaders, and they were very engaged, but at the same token, I was saying, how would you change, or what would you recommend, and what is and it was very difficult as well. I think we need to present these buckets and let the public, the community, just go back and forth and see what they feel like it will be their priorities and where they are willing to give up and to gain some other resources. But I feel, at least with myself, that at this point we give them up, we identify the 5, 3, and 0 levy, and it's time to have a feedback, and people need to have some time to give us that response. And at the same time, I wasn't sure how I can, with the information that I have and what Maureen is saying, we work really hard to establish all of this on different scenarios. I have a hard time without listen to what people's priorities is to give a vote and saying, okay, let's move, fire supplies down or up without having that input at this time. So, yes, I will have to pass as well if I have to prioritize at this point.
Okay.
Thanks.
So with that, I'm going to, with that feedback, I'm going to ask if there's anyone else that has proposals on things they want to move around. Because if it's a sense of the committee that we've got a list here and we want to go get the feedback of the public on this list as it stands today, I'm certainly willing to go ahead with that, and I think that's a reasonable thing. The question I wanted to answer is, have people have a chance to look at this and see if there was any adjustments that they wanted to make? And we've heard from at least a couple people that the answer is, no, I actually want to go with this to the public with the changes that the staff made. So I guess I'll open that up for questions. Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, hi. I'm at a little disadvantage because I'm at a distance here. Can you just scroll through the spreadsheet so I can see kind of where everything landed up? I've got a hard copy here that's in the agenda packet, but can you just kind of slowly go from top to bottom so I can get another look at it real quick?
Yeah, so I'll show you here that it's really where the interesting stuff is happening is kind of right where the colors change in the spreadsheet here. So I'll show you this one here where these kind of public safety ones ended right at the bubble between 3% and 0%. And then if you're okay with me scrolling, I'm going to scroll upwards here.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay. And then at the 5% and 3%, here's how things broke out that way. And then just, in the interest of covering all the breakpoints, here's the breakpoint between the non-selected items and the 0% items, as it currently stands.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay. So with that, I will put out one last call then to see if we're going to get any more proposals for swapping things here, or if people want to go. And again, what we're doing tonight is we're setting a preliminary kind of set of things that we're going to go to the public with. I think it's going to be presented as this is kind of a draft, and that we certainly haven't over-invested in tweaking it to within an inch of its life. So there's lots of room in here for having conversations about what might be different. And that we reserve that kind of tweaky conversation for kind of the last two meetings of the month.
I can support that actually because you don't know what Chair, what the stat or the city or our neighbors are going to say, and so why invest all the time now for it to be something that people are not even interested in or invested in, and then on top of that, we still don't know what the city.
Yeah, there's no perfect at this point. So Neil, go ahead.
Just a couple of observations, and I agree with what Maureen is saying. I agree completely. My item was the ash trees. And Carl, wouldn't you know, we were going to Parade of Homes over the weekend, and we went to one in Edina, just down below Interlochen Country Club. And there's a new subdivision going in there, and the first house coming is a black and white. It's a Swedish design, total Swedish design. Very, very unique. And so we were parading through it. And I happened to come down the stairway, and I'm looking at the floor, and I said, they are really beautiful floor. Everybody's using wood floors and wood floors. And I said to the guy, what are these? And he said, it's ash. I said, wouldn't you know? Come to Bloomington, we'll give you all kinds of ash. But I think that we should just get on, because eventually this is going to go to the city council. If the city council decides they're going to do a zero levy, everything on this list goes into the fire. They'll blow it all out. Will they have enough chutzpah to go to 5%? Probably not. So what do? They're going to go 3%. So my brain just says, okay, look at the 3% list. That's what's going. And besides, I really do want to watch the debate. I am convinced that the next president of the United States is on stage tonight. And I want to see how that works out.
Probably right.
As opposed to sitting here and looking at all this stuff. That's just me.
We're not going to get a consensus around that. Okay, so what I'm sensing is that in terms of the discussion with the community, that where we're at now is good enough, not perfect, but good enough, and it reflects enough of what we think the priorities ought to be set to, that we're going to go ahead with that. Maureen, you raised your hand down there.
But you've incorporated.
I've incorporated that.
Okay.
Yeah. And just to be clear, the one thing I do want to talk about a little bit here when we talk about that, because there's a little bit of a footnote on that at the 3% to 1%, 0% item here. And I just want to make sure that this one got reflected correctly. So just to be clear, these really ought to be at the 565. Because they were going to be in that next bucket. So actually even more, it should be more like the 575. Yeah, so that puts that there. So Josh, just to be clear on where this ends up going here, just to kind of put a fine point on that, is this is the Homeland Security position was moving down. These were all moving down into the 0% bucket. So I just adjusted that to reflect that with the other changes that we made. Okay, so are we, as a group, are we ready to go take this to the public and hear their feedback and see what they got to say?
Yes.
I do have one question.
Go ahead.
Are we showing them this list? Like, this is the list of things we're thinking about, and this is what we should be asking for feedback from?
I think there will be there's a kind of high-level document that the staff is providing, but for people who are interested in detail, we would provide this level of detail to people for people who want to kind of dive in at that level, because there'll be people who want to do that. And likely on the handout that we have, the handout's going to contain some form of this information in it. I think it's boiled down a little bit more than what this is. And then if people are saying, well, what does that mean more precisely? We can break it down by department and say this department has these impacts, this department has these impacts at each of these levels.
Mr.
Yeah.
Mr. Co-Chair,
Go ahead,
could
Jessica. Yeah.
Could I add something? I really like the spreadsheet with the revenue increase summary. If we can go there, please.
You're talking about this here?
Yes,
Yeah.
that one. It makes so much sense to me. The only thing that I will request is if we can add another column and it says what is the percentage that will be reduced as a department. So it is the administration. It means that overall their budget is going to be cut by 2, 5, 10%.
Okay, so we'd have a column that says here's the department budget, and then there's a column that says the reduction. So
correct. That will help to visualize a lot better.
Okay.
At least to me. Thank you.
I see Kari writing a note down right now, so I think we'll see that that's reflected in there.
Mr. Chair, could I just ask a question on that?
Go ahead.
I don't disagree with that, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure I was tracking fully. Is the thought that we would have a percentage reflected about how much of the whole administration is, or communications, or legal, or parks and rec, in the left-hand column? Because we do have the percentage of the change, I guess.
I think what's not reflected on here, and I think what Jessica is suggesting is that we should, in some form, we should show the department's budget number, and we should show the percentage that this reduction represents of their total budget. So that's not represented on here right now.
I see.
Okay, so that's the information that she's suggesting is missing and would be useful.
And it's
Okay.
4 to 6% of their budgets overall.
Well, I haven't gone and run the numbers on this to see how it tallies out to the department budget. So this is letting it fall where it falls, kind of thing. So, but that's, I think, what Jessica is suggesting there.
Correct.
So then on that, I would just suggest someone give some thought to whether to put that in context. It makes any sense to show what those various departments' percentage of the whole budget is.
Yep.
As well. And maybe that's a bad idea. There could be reasons I haven't thought that through, that would be not helpful, but
Yeah.
it might.
But I think and this is always the problem that I've run into in this, is that if you show every step of the math,
Exactly.
then there gets to be so much information that people's eyes glaze over. And so how to communicate the essentials of what we're trying to communicate here without overloading people with information, I think, is the trick. And what I would suggest is that the staff is listening to kind of what we're talking about here, and they think they understand the goal that we're talking about, and to get them to kind of noodle on how to best present that in a way that quickly and efficiently communicates it to the person on the street.
Multiple
So.
charts.
Okay?
The deputy or the assistant manager.
Chris, were you waving your hand?
I was just going to say, when we communicate this to the public, I think we want to make it clear that it's not that, say, admin and finance don't have any cuts in the 3% levy scenario. They just don't have any additional cuts
Right.
above and beyond what was in the 5%.
Exactly right.
scenario.
Yeah. So this is the tricky communication
Right.
kind of problem to do. So and so I think we'll have to have a conversation offline. This meeting is not the right venue to design a handout like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think trying to figure out how to communicate that effectively is key to having this conversation. Okay, so with that, unless there is any further input, I'm going to say that we're done creating the three kind of sets of options. And in the preliminary way to go out and have the conversation with the public. No one is standing and waving their hands and lying down on the train track, which is a good sign. Okay. Let's see here. So that completes item number 4.2. Was there anything else that needed to come before the committee tonight? Hari, Jamie?
And Mr. Co-Chairs, committee members, we did just want to show you the start of what we're doing to try and frame this up for the community as part of that engagement process. So Kari has that ready to show you. This is working with Emily Larson, our community engagement and outreach person.
So what I have pulled up here, and you have a handout of, is just something, it's a draft of a flyer that we're putting together that we could hand out, for example, like at the farmer's market. We could also use this to put on the committee's website and the Let's Talk Bloomington page to try to explain what these different scenarios have in them. And then also to use this information for the listening sessions that will be coming up later this month. So just wanted to show you what it's looking like and just kind of get your initial feedback. So roll down here. So we'll have an explanation of the budget issue that we're facing due to our reduced lodging and admission tax revenues. And then these 3 different scenarios with the different percentages of tax levy increase for 2021, and then highlighting how much budget spending needs to be reduced in those 3 different scenarios right at the top. And then we have the section of how does this impact you, and we will be putting high-level information of top things that these different budget scenarios include, as well as information about different values of homes, like the median value home, but we'll also have some other examples as well. And also for rental properties of how those different tax levy increases would affect the property tax for the year. And information on how they can share feedback either on the Let's Talk Bloomington website or at the listening sessions. So far, I think we have close to 50 people registered for the Thursday night session, and I think maybe 9 for the Saturday session. But some people could register right before it starts as well. But those are, I think, pre-registrations to date. And then we also have a back page as well, and just some more information about why there's an issue with the budget for this year, why the community budget advisory committee was formed, and what we have been doing to control costs, and just kind of the process of what we've been going through. So, just wanted to share kind of what we're going to be putting together after tonight to get out pretty quickly to the public.
Neil.
Thank you. I think this is where, when it says in the second column, how does this impact you, the second block? See, that's where I think it'd be great to do the departmental thing, where you do the columns of administration, and it shows in that scenario that the police and fire won't get cut if they do the 5%. If they only increase the 3%, there ain't no free lunch. So, I think if you do it by department, we'll be better off than trying to give them detail, because they just get lost in the numbers. But I think that would be great there, in my opinion.
So the one point I think that's important to make, though, is that there are certain things here that fall on certain groups that they need to be aware of. So, for example, there's kind of fee increases on golfing. There's impacts on arts organizations. And so I think we need to be transparent for people who are interested in providing that level of detail, to have the backup for it. Yeah. But I agree that at this level, you can't, if we put the list of 90 things on here, it would be so small that we would need a magnifying glass in order to read it. So here's what I'll suggest on this. We got this tonight for the first time. I would like people to take it home and have a look at it. And if you have feedback on this, you should send it in to Kari, and then she'll relay that on to the staff.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
I think it's important for us to upfront in this document to state that there is really no way to keep taxes at 0 increases and not cut. So I think the average person is looking, don't raise my taxes and don't cut what I care about. And I think we find ourselves in a situation that that's just impossible. And I think we've got to lead with that. People need to realize this is actually different than years past. So that would be one of my pieces of feedback on the communication front. And I do have just a question about how we are engaging some of the groups that might be impacted, namely those who are going to be asked to pay an increased user fee, whether it's for the Bloomington Ice Garden, golf, etc., how they are being reached out to and engaged and invited to participate in one of these 2 sessions. And maybe if our Parks and Rec director, Ann, is on the phone, she could speak to that.
We've actually lost Anne off the call in the last couple of minutes. I apologize.
Okay. We'll have to relay that to her. Okay. Other comments on the handout? Okay, thank you. Any other things that we should be discussing tonight?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I'm just going to make a comment. We received a letter. It was on the table tonight. And this was from Linda Lang. And it was one of the most articulate, well-written communications I have seen in a long time. And she gets it. And I just want her to know, if she's paying attention, she may not be. I was very impressed. Okay.
Well, thanks for calling that out. And we have been getting a steady set of feedback from folks. So I think the people are noticing what we're up to. And I'd encourage people, whether it's a email to the staff or going to the Let's Talk Bloomington site and offering your feedback here, coming to one of the calls that we're going to have next week. Folks, we're at this point all about getting input on what we're proposing, and so that we can, as Maureen put it, do the horse trading over the next couple weeks at the meeting. The meetings we'll be having before we send the kind of final items off to the city council. Okay. So one final call. Anything else for the meeting tonight? Okay, hearing nothing, the meeting stands adjourned.
Thank you.